Hey everybody, it's me again, Randy Ray, the Literate Texan, and I've got my weekly wrap up for last week's reading, which is going to have more titles than usual because it is Shorty September. But last week I read crime novels. I read a novel about California. I read a book that was basically a number of book reviews, and then I made some progress in some other books. I read 1,169 pages last week, which is a lot for me in a single week. But I read them all on the Kindle, but I think I've got this set up in a way that I can show you the covers of all these. The first book that I finished last week was called Day of the Locust. And what's going on here on my computer all of a sudden? There's always something going on here. Day of the Locust was by Nathanael West, and here's the cover. Okay, so Nathanael West died at the age of 37. He was a friend of F. Scott Fitzgerald, and he died really young. He only completed 4 books, of which I've read 2 now. The first one that I read was Miss Lonely Hearts, which I've talked about in a previous video, but The Day of the Locust was pretty interesting. It was about these misfits who are all hanging out together in California, and it's probably in the 1930s is when it's set. But, one of the things that he mentions multiple times in the book is that these people have come to California to die. And basically the misfits that he's talking about in this particular book are people who've come out to California because they want to become celebrities. They want to be famous. But most of them just don't have what it takes. And some of them are just downright misfits too. But you've got characters in here who used to be vaudevillians and used to be famous on vaudeville, or their dad used to be famous on vaudeville. But they're just not quite good enough. But they all wind up hanging out together. It's a little bit gloomy, but it's really darkly funny. It's the only book I read last week that actually had a cockfight in it. I'll put it that way. So yeah, Nathanael West, probably an acquired taste. You'll have to check him out for yourself to see if you like him, but The Day of the Locust wasn't too bad. The second book that I read last week was called Promised Land by Robert B. Parker. I don't know if you've ever read anything by Robert B. Parker or not, but that's what the cover looks like here. Part of the Kindle Unlimited, as you can see there. But Robert B. Parker wrote a series of private detective novels about a character named Spencer, who's a real interesting character. Apparently he used to be a boxer. He's a real tough guy, but he's got his own code of ethics, which is not unusual among private detectives in literature. They almost always seem to have their own code of ethics. But yeah, Spencer's a great character. I get the feeling reading this book that he wasn't much like he was on the TV show where he was played by, I think, Robert Urich. But I didn't really watch the TV show. My mom did, but I didn't. So I don't really know. Maybe it was completely dead on perfect. But anyway, Promised Land was really entertaining. He's a private detective, and he gets hired by a client because the client's wife has left him. And he doesn't know where she went, but he wants to get her to come back. They've been married for like 22 years. He doesn't know what her intentions are or anything like that. So, and then hijinks ensue, of course. It is fairly short novel, but longer than most of the novels you would read for Shorty September. I just had a hankering to read a lot of that one. So the next one was called, I got really diverse reading this month, Unfinished Business, Notes of a Chronic Rereader by Vivian Gornick. I like the cover for this one almost as much as I like the cover for The Day of the Locust. Maybe it's just the color scheme, I don't know. Vivian Gornick is an intellectual. She's a movie critic. Not a movie critic, she's a book critic. I don't know why I always say movie critic, but she's a book critic. But this is basically a collection of essays that she's written about various books that she's read and reread multiple times throughout her reading career. It's good. Honestly, I hadn't read any of the books that she was talking about in this book, classics or otherwise. So, but it was still good. Her insights were interesting, and it made me want to make a list of the books that she was talking about in this book so that I could go read them and get more out of her book. So maybe that makes me a chronic rereader too. And then the final book that I finished this week was The Return of the Prodigal Son by Henri J.M. Nouwen. And let's see here. I don't have that one on here to show a picture of. But this was written by a Catholic priest who found Michelangelo's painting of The Return of the Prodigal Son really moving. And he put a lot of thought and prayer into it over the years, realizing eventually that at some point in our lives, we all play the role of the prodigal son. At some point in our lives, we all play the role of the son who stayed home. And at some point in our lives, if we're doing things right, we eventually play the role of the father. And I thought it was a pretty moving book. A lot of the themes overlap a lot with some of the spiritual themes in my recovery program. You know, a lot of people know that I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. But yeah, there were a lot of ideas that overlapped with the ideas in Alcoholics Anonymous. And then I made progress in 2 more books, but I didn't finish them. One of them was a novel called Deadpan by Richard Walter. And this is actually part of a greater project that I'm reading. It's not just a part of Shorty September, although it is pretty short. But it's also part of a project that I call Steve Donahue Ate My Brain. Last year, Steve Donahue, as in most years, as in all years, Steve Donahue put together a top 10 list of the best fiction books of the year. And the thing about Steve Donahue's top 10 list is he's actually read all the books in that category. So when he makes a top 10 list, it really is a top 10 list. Other movie critics, book critics, excuse me, there I go again. Other book critics haven't read everything the way that Steve Donahue has. And so their top 10 lists aren't necessarily as reliable. Deadpan's a really odd book. There's some magical realism, surrealism stuff going on. It's set in the 70s. The main character is a car dealer, but he wakes up in an alternate reality where he is a well-known Jewish comedian on a late-night talk show. And eventually, he just starts to lean into these alternate realities. It seems to me like he's careening from one alternate reality into another over and over again. But that might not be the case. There might only be 1 or 2 alternate realities, and I'm just a little bit lost. But my understanding is it's okay to be a little bit lost in a book like this, and it's okay to just keep reading it and enjoying it until the very end, and maybe it'll make a lot more sense after the ending. Maybe it won't. I don't know. I'll find out this week when I finish it. And then finally, I'm doing a buddy read with a friend of mine, and we're only reading a chapter a day, so it'll be a while before we finish this. It's a book called Lowtown by Daniel Polansky. It's a sword and sorcery novel, and I'm really enjoying this one a lot. And I wish we were reading it a little faster, because it's about a character, the warden, and he lives in a seedy neighborhood in this medieval town, pseudo-medieval town where there's magic and stuff. But the warden, is a war veteran and was at one time, fine, upstanding citizen. And now he's a drug dealer and he's a crime lord for this particular neighborhood. And you don't know how he went from being the guy who enforces the law to the guy who's in charge of breaking the law, because that's all being told in flashbacks throughout the book. But that is the case. And anyway, what breaks him out of his normal routine is that there have been some young children killed. There's some kind of serial killer at work in his neighborhood. And he's working with the police, or what passes for the police in this particular setting, to try to figure this out and get to the bottom of it and stop it. Because, even if you're a drug dealer, you don't want dead babies in the alleyways of your neighborhoods. And so that is my weekly wrap up for the week ending September 7th or September 8th, depending on how you want to clock it. I don't know. But I'm in the middle of some other books too, but I didn't make any progress on them last week, so I'm not going to talk about them here. But I'll be back next week with another weekly update. Before then, I hope to have some more entertaining videos about the other subjects here too. They'll always be about books though, because that's what I cover on this channel. Until next time, stay sexy, folks, and stay hydrated. It's so important for your health. And look forward to seeing you again.